Welcome back, everybody, to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brook Olsen. Again, this week, my special guest is Alissa Jerud, PhD. She is the author of Emotion Savvy Parenting. And you are also in clinical practice, correct? You've got two children,
Yep.
and you're a mom that's in the middle of all of this parenting stuff, which is, as I read, was your impetus to write the book. So let's get into this a little bit. Alissa, what I'm curious about a little bit is your your station in wanting to write a book about parenting. Um, there's a lot of books out there about gentle parenting, authoritative parenting. Um, a lot of this stuff is Dreiker's based. You've pulled on cognitive behavioral therapy and DBT from Marshall Lanahan to start to put in the tools for your book. Can you tell me a little bit and tell our audience a little bit about how you have, because I think the components here are kind of all of the same, but there's a refinement in your book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And can you speak a little bit to, the broader concepts here, but also the refinement from some of these other ideas that are out there about parenting?
Sure. Yeah. It's a great question. So there's no shortage of parenting advice out there, right? There are so many books, so many podcasts, so many resources. And what I have found is for parents, it can be really confusing, right? To know which one makes the most sense for them, for their kids, for their families. Also, from my perspective, a lot of what is out there, even if I agree with much of what's out there, in certain areas, it doesn't really get at what I consider to be the thing that makes parenting so difficult. And that's that as parents, we are inevitably faced with some really intense emotions along the way on our journeys as parents. And so my book really aims to provide science-backed strategies, like you said, from cognitive behavioral therapy, from dialectical behavior therapy, to help parents better weather the emotions that they encounter, whether it's their own emotions or their children's emotions. And I think what's out there typically focuses more on either meeting the children's emotional needs, the child's emotional needs, often at the expense of the parent's well-being, or maybe focuses on like helping to meet the parents' needs, sometimes at the expense of the child's well-being. And so my approach, I'm really trying to think about like how can we help this entire system, this whole family, be as emotionally agile as possible. And I think one of the best ways we can do that is by helping parents to be as emotionally savvy as they can be.
I've always thought that the parents are the answer in this, and the co-regulation comes from them. And if the
For sure.
parents can't regulate, children can't regulate. They don't have the model to. And from the audience that we have here today, these are not just parents that are doing the normal parenting day-to-day stuff in a intact family where things might be going okay for the most part. We're on the far other side of that, where emotional regulation is at a premium at best.
Yeah.
And the point I think that you're making in your book and you're making in this conversation is that parents' ability to be self-aware enough to make the adjustments to regulate their systems so their children have a mirror to work from is the imperative. Is that getting to the
Yeah, for sure. And I would say also just for our own well-being as parents, right? Like I'm also, parenting is one of the toughest jobs there is. And I really want to try to think about like how can I lighten the load for parents a little bit? And I think when we're emotionally skillful, right? Think about any interaction that you've had where you're like, wow, I did a really good job. Like I handled that well. We feel so much better about ourselves. And when we're losing our cool, we're yelling, we're just giving in to our kids because we're so uncomfortable that they're crying or whining and we just want to make it stop. And so we do something that really isn't how we ideally want to parent. We act in a way that doesn't align with our values. We don't usually feel all that great about ourselves. And so I think also just for parents' own well-being, parenting from this place where emotions are there, they can feel those emotions in full, but they aren't necessarily calling the shots. that can be really empowering and really freeing for parents. It can help support their well-being.
Getting up into the prefrontal cortex and making decisions, not reacting to the.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So the portal in this, my thoughts. I come from a somatic background,
Hmm.
and um, I think, and I'm wondering if you agree that the process starts with the acknowledgement of the somatic state of I'm dysregulated or I'm
Sure.
in trouble here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the hijack point as well as the portal home.
Hmm.
How do you suggest that that switch gets pushed in the right direction when it's activated?
Fabulous question. I mean, what I will say is it's easier said than done, right? To recognize, oh, I'm starting to get flooded. I'm hijacked. That isn't going to serve me or my kids or my, whoever it is. It's not going to serve anyone all that well. Certainly easier said than done to get there. And I think the more that we can start to increase awareness of our emotions, including all of the many components that make up our emotions, because there's more than just the physiological symptoms that we feel or a
Mhm.
physiological components of an emotion. There are a number of different ingredients that go in to make up a given emotion. And so knowing about that, knowing the different ingredients, and understanding each emotion's complexity, that can actually go a long way toward kind of offering a number of different points for intervention. So in my book, I liken emotions to being similar to a batch of cookies, right? Like a batch of cookies, in a batch of cookies, you have oftentimes like wet ingredients and dry ingredients, and you mix them together, and voila, you have these beautiful, delicious cookies. But when you have that cookie, that finished product, you don't see all of the many ingredients, the flour, the milk, the water, the sugar, the oil, whatever else went in there. You don't see all of those ingredients that made up that cookie. And the same is true of our emotions. So our emotions are made up of all of these many ingredients. And I think of them as being the primary ingredients and the secondary ingredients. And the primary ingredients I think of as being like the things that we need in order for an emotion to fire in the first place, right? It's not going to occur. That emotion won't set in if we don't have those first ingredients, the primary ingredients. The secondary ingredients, which include the physiological symptoms you're talking about, right? The somatic component, those are the things that happen once an emotion is already in full swing, right?
Mhm.
It has fired. And so then there are a number of different skills we can use to target both the primary ingredients as well as the secondary ingredients. And we can pick and choose depending on the moment, right? Are those physiological symptoms really the thing that's kind of making this so tough to navigate? And if so, we can use skills to dampen those. Maybe though, it's like the prompting event, the thing that is actually causing the emotional reaction. And maybe there's something we can do there to tweak that, right? And that would be addressing a primary ingredient. So, yes, I think you're right. We can certainly go after the somatic component. And there are, thankfully, other ways to go about this too.
So one of the things that I think that I've used a lot in my practice and that I work with parents a lot in this cognitive intervention piece is once we can get it slowed down, if we can get it slowed down, is the question of what is the outcome that I'm looking for and what is the outcome going to be if I go down this or this or this road.
Yeah.
And I think as parents, the outcomes that we're looking for are sometimes just to get control over a situation, to
Yeah.
stop the
Right.
cycle.
Whatever's happening. Yeah.
And that's not always appropriate. And the other outcome is how do I want to teach my child to express and to be able to express appropriately, which becomes a reflection of how I engage in that conversation, right? And one of the other components is just flat safety. How do you help parents through your book and through your practice navigate those outcomes or any broader piece of what we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. Oh, well, that's quite a question. I think we could have a whole hour-long conversation just on that right there. I will say first that when I think about what ideally for me as a parent in just about all interactions with my kids, like my number one goal is usually to actually try to connect with my kids. So that's like the thing that I'm aiming for. Obviously, sometimes I've got to prioritize something else in a given moment, but ultimately that's what I want. And my guess is that's what most of your audience wants as well. They want to connect with their kids. And like you said, when our kids are doing something that's pushing our buttons, they're making a mess, they're fighting with their sibling, they're, not putting on their shoes, or they're not doing their homework, they're doing something that is really upsetting to us. It's frustrating, annoying, maybe angering. It is so normal, so natural to try to want to control their behavior, like you're saying, to get them to stop doing what they're doing so that we don't have to feel so uncomfortable. And that makes a lot of sense because as humans, we're wired to want to avoid discomfort, whether that's physical discomfort, right? Your hands in the fire, you want to pull it out. Or if it's emotional discomfort, if you're anxious, if you're sad, you want to try to get rid of that feeling, to not feel that way. If you're angry, oftentimes we want to get rid of that anger by lashing out at the person. It's like a way to discharge that anger, maybe get the person to change so that we don't have to feel so angry anymore. And the same is true with our kids. Unfortunately, when it comes to emotional pain or discomfort, our attempts to avoid it by trying to, control somebody else oftentimes backfire, and they can actually prolong and exacerbate our suffering. So even if you get your kid, maybe you yell at your kid to stop doing what they're doing and they comply, they listen to what you're saying. Well, that may work that time, but it may not work down the road. And even more importantly, each time we try to control our kids in an attempt to not have to feel so uncomfortable ourselves, that habit of reducing distress by trying to control our kids just gets stronger. So the next time we are in a similar situation, that's like our go-to strategy. That's all we know to do. And so I'm not saying that we don't ever want to get in there and, like, especially to your question around safety. If a kid is, I don't know, they're hitting their sibling, you can't like allow that to continue. But you can recognize, oh, my kid may not be able to stop themselves. I can't control them to make them do it. I could get in there though and lovingly prevent that from happening again, right? Put my arm in there, maybe move the sibling that's getting hit to a different area so that they're not getting hit anymore. So there are ways you can intervene that don't require your kid to comply, that don't require you to have full control over your kid, that can bring about the change that needs to happen in order to ensure everybody's safety.
So as you're talking, I'm having this thought about comfort and discomfort, about dysregulation and co-regulation. And I think one of the things that we make a mistake, and I'm interested in your feedback with this, is that comforting or trying to change the child's discomfort piece is not always the prescription for change. I think that teaching our children that this world isn't about comfort, that this world is about navigating or getting comfortable with discomfort, is actually the place where resiliency in their system sits, and their ability to be in relationship in a healthy manner um, operates from. Would you agree
I
with
couldn't
that?
agree more. Yeah, I agree 100%. And I'll just piggyback on that by saying for parents, right, just as we want to avoid our own emotional discomfort, we want to avoid our kids too, right? Because it brings up emotional discomfort in us. And so it's so normal, so natural for parents when they see their kid in distress to want to try to distract them out of their tears, or convince them it's not something to be upset about, or tickle them, right? So that they start laughing instead of crying. We want to do something to fix it so that it's all better. And yet when we do that, we send the message inadvertently, right? It was only with the best of intentions, but we end up sending the message that, like, it's not good to feel that way, right? To feel that discomfort, maybe that we don't think that they can tolerate it, that we can't tolerate seeing them so upset. And so we're kind of missing out on this really valuable, rich learning opportunity for our kids, and I think for ourselves as well.
We lose attunement.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my mentors a couple of decades ago talked about this notion, and we're back into the idea of co-regulation. But when you're in relationship with your child, what you're feeling internally is actually what they're feeling internally, and that acknowledgement to them sends the message of, you're here, you see me, and you're safe. Now we can do something maybe differently from there. I think that there's a natural down regulating in the nervous system when something like that happens. In your book, you talk about ACT, acceptance, regulation, and tolerance. This seems like that's a little bit in that realm. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, in my book, I present this framework, right? Or a set of tools that I call the ART tools, or ART for short. So, again, like you said, it stands for accept, regulate, and tolerate. And these are science backed strategies that we can all use, whether we're parents or not, or we're, just navigating our own stress that has nothing to do with our kids, or that maybe has to do with a loved one other than children. But again, these are strategies we can use to help us weather more skillfully those painful emotions we sometimes encounter along our way. Accept is really all about, how can I accept what is, as opposed to saying what should be, right? So when I talk about acceptance, I'm not talking about liking or approving of something, but just acknowledging that these are the facts. This is how it is right now. I don't have to like it, but this is what it is. And I can accept that without judgment, without saying this is what it is, but it shouldn't be that way. Instead, just this is what it is. And we can talk about why that can be so helpful, so freeing, both for ourselves, for our kids, for our relationships. But it's a really powerful thing when we can move toward that acceptance. And we can use a skill called mindfulness to help us be more accepting of the present moment, whatever is going on in the moment. Then we've got regulate, which is all about, how can we feel. Let me backtrack. Regulate is really first about, how can we understand our emotions, right? The complexity of our emotions, so that we might be able to render ourselves less vulnerable to experiencing painful, unwanted emotions in the first place. And so that we might be able to change those emotions when they do arise and aren't serving us well. And then there are a number of different skills that we can use to help us regulate. And those skills are actually skills that directly target what I called earlier the primary ingredients of a given emotion. So the regulate skills help us tweak the primary ingredients. And then the tolerate piece, that's, sometimes we're going to feel a really strong emotion, like just about anyone would in a given situation. And so, how can we feel those emotions, let them be there as however intense they may be, without letting those emotions hijack us, without doing something that we're going to later regret, that's going to make things worse, that's going to dysregulate our child even further. That's where the tolerate skills come in. And then there are a number of skills to help us tolerate, and those target or address, tweak the secondary ingredients that make up a given emotion.
So I've got two directions I kind of want to go here for a minute. Could you talk a little bit more about what primary ingredients might be?
Yeah, certainly. So these are what we need, like I said, in order for an emotion to fire. So obviously, we have to have something has to happen to cause an emotion to fire, what I call a prompting event. And that could be something outside of you. So your kids are doing something, they just drew on the couch, or they are, again, they're chasing each other around the house and knocking things over as they go. Maybe your teenager just, screams something nasty to you or to their sibling. Again, something happens. It could also be something within us. Maybe it's just like, all of a sudden you were in the kitchen with your kids and boom, you have this like intense raging headache, right? And you just are like, oh my gosh, right? Now feeling really unwell in that moment. But something happens that triggers some kind of, or prompts a response in you. And in response to that prompting event, so that's the first ingredient, we have usually some sort of a thought or interpretation about that prompting event. So, maybe if my kids are chasing each other and they're knocking things down, and my thought is, they're so wild and like they won't ever sit still, and look at it, they're gonna break the whole house, right? That's my thought. That's probably going to give way to a pretty strong emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So our thoughts, again, right, that we're going to have some sort of a thought. Maybe if it's my teenager saying something kind of unkind, some in a really rude voice, like maybe I have a thought, that's completely unacceptable. I wasn't allowed to talk to my parents like that. How dare he, or something along those lines.
Way out of acceptance on that one, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, yep. And then we've got what we call vulnerability factors. And these are the things that are going to make us more likely to have certain unhelpful thoughts or interpretations about prompting events. Right. So maybe there are some days we can all probably think about this where, like, maybe you didn't sleep well the night before, you've got a cold, or you just had like an intense disagreement with your coworker, right? Something happens, and that makes you more vulnerable to having negative thoughts about whatever follows from there, right? So maybe for me, I know if I don't sleep well, or I'm really hungry, I didn't have a chance to eat a filling meal or something, and then my kids do something that is kind of, not ideal, I'm more likely to have a negative thought that's going to set off an emotion that it's going to make it hard for me to regulate. So that's what we're talking about. So these vulnerability factors can be things that just happen, or they can also be something that happened in the distant past. So maybe when I was a kid, I got really hurt when I was running and being chased by somebody, and fell and really hurt myself. And now maybe I'm really worried that's going to happen to my kids when they're doing this. Or maybe when I was a kid, I was screamed at if I ever raised my voice at my parents. So now that might color the thoughts that I have when my kid says something unkind to me. So those are the different types of the vulnerability factors. So again, we've got the prompting event, some sort of thought or interpretation about the prompting event, and then those vulnerability factors.
So when you're trying to weave these concepts together, Alyssa, the trick here, I think, in the brain is getting switches to go off in different directions. So you've got the prompting event, you've got that place where the emotion is here, it's come in, and you don't want that emotion leading the charge. And this is where the cognitive process you want to get to take over.
Yeah, right. Like, so ideally, right, if you think about it, the primary ingredients, when we're at that stage, maybe the emotion hasn't really necessarily gotten in motion yet, right? It may not fire in full. You might start to realize your kids are, making a ton of noise or a mess, and you have the thought, why won't they just shut up already, right? You have that thought, and that emotion of anger and annoyance is like kind of there or about to really set in full. Well, you could take a moment, like you're saying, to notice the thoughts you're having. Maybe think about bringing in a skill, to help change those thoughts. So you could use a skill I could get to called, like reframing unhelpful thoughts, where you shift how you view what's going on. Maybe you even take a more of a mindfulness based approach, where you just notice, not instead of treating that thought that, like, oh, they're being so wild, they're jerks, or whatever it may be. You could just notice it, that you're having that as a thought, instead of latching onto that thought as fact. But we could also target one of the other vulnerability factors. So if your kids are making a mess and it's really kind of dysregulating for you, maybe it's actually bringing them outside where they can make a mess and it's not ruining your living room, right? Or maybe it is, if they're shrieking really loudly, maybe it's just moving to the other room so that you don't have to hear the loud screaming. There are ways you can target that, or you could problem solve with them to find a different way for them to go about doing what they're doing that isn't so upsetting for you. Or you could go after the vulnerability factors. If you recognize, what, I'm getting really like on edge, I'm having those unhelpful thoughts about my kids, and it's probably because I'm starving, right? Go
Mm-hmm.
grab some food. Or maybe, get some exercise. If you've been sitting all day and you're feeling antsy, maybe that means maybe you should all get out and go for a walk, right? So there are lots of different ways we can intervene there to shake up what's happening, and hopefully, like you're saying, regulate so that that emotion doesn't hijack you and take over and lead you to act in a way that you're not going to feel proud of later.
Yeah. Parenting is not a passive sport.
No, not at all.
And, I had a yoga teacher once that had a framing of how you do anything is how you do everything.
Mm.
And when I started my training as a um, parent coach many years ago, I started to notice something that really changed, and that is how I spoke at the time would have been to my grandson began to be the way I interacted with everybody, and relationships began to become very more intimate, more engaging, because what I was doing is I was entering down into his world. I was entering into that mindfulness state of what's really going on here, what's really important here, and what is it that I want to communicate and have those pieces set in. But these are skill sets. And in order to do anything that you're talking about, the first thing that has to be installed, I think, in a parent's awareness is the skill sets. So I know where I'm going to go next. I know that under these circumstances, this is the phrase I'm going to use, or this is the patterning that I'm going to install in this environment. And these are skill sets that most parents weren't taught as children. There's no place out there that people are going to get these skill sets short of getting help from a coach, from a book, from an interaction where this is a trial of this happened. I tried this, this didn't work. Where's the refinement in this process? And I'm guessing that when you're in clinical practice, you work with parents in this arena. So reading your book is a good start, but having that one-on-one personal interaction or that group interaction in installing these, I think becomes really important.
Yeah, yeah, and it certainly can be really helpful to have somebody working with you to talk things out. Like I said, you said parenting is not a passive sport. It's not for the faint of heart. It's really hard. And so even if you've got these skills down, you've mastered them, like it still might be helpful to have somebody to talk to, even if it's not a coach, a therapist, maybe it's just a friend who you can, talk to about like, oh, this was a really tough moment and I'm trying to think about like what I could do differently next time around I'm in a situation like this. Yes, I think that all can be really, really helpful. I will also say a few things just for parents who may be thinking like, this all sounds great and yet it also I can't see myself being able to do this. I think knowing that again we're in this for the long haul with our kids and we're not going to get every moment right. I don't, right? I have tons of skills in my arsenal and I still mess up. I make mistakes as a parent. And that's part of being human. It's going to happen. And when we're trying to bring about behavior change, unfortunately, that is rarely, if ever, an overnight process. It takes time. And sometimes the very first step is just increasing awareness, just recognizing when our emotions get the better of us. Starting to increase that awareness can go a long way over the long run, right? We start to realize, oh yeah, maybe there was something I could have done differently back there or that other time. And then we can start trying to experiment, trying to bring in these skills. So you don't have to have them down, right? You don't have to have them mastered to be able to start to bring about changes. And I will also say, I think in addition to like having these skills is great, it's helpful. But if we're still operating under the impression as parents that like when we're feeling uncomfortable, we've got to find a way to get our kids to change, I really believe that no amount of skills are going to help get you where you want to go, right? Because you're ultimately going to be setting yourself up for frustration. And so the more you can first embrace this idea that maybe the focus needs to be on ourselves, on shifting our own responses, that's when those skills I think can be most helpful.
Yeah, I think when a child sees a dysregulated parent and they throw out statements like, I don't know what to do with you, or this is just so far out of hand. I can't do this anymore. That sends a message to the kid that their primary caregiver is not able to hold the space for them to be dysregulated to handle that. That's a hell of a message to be sending. And for the parents, I mean, they are the primary regulating force or dysregulating force in the relationship.
Yes.
And everything co-regulates or co-dysregulates off of the parent.
Yes. The one thing I just want to note, I want to jump in here to say, because I want to be super clear that I am not in any way trying to blame parents for wanting to
No, no,
change their kids, right? Or for getting dysregulated. It's just so normal, so
right.
natural. We all have those pulls and we all go there at times. And
Absolutely.
the more we can recognize that when we do, it probably isn't serving us all that well in the long run. That's what I want to help parents start to see, while also having compassion for themselves for all the times where they have dysregulated everyone even more, right?
Yeah.
Or they've done something that later they wish they hadn't done.
Yeah. And to your point, I think the awareness of that and the ability for a parent to recognize that state, whether it is regulated or dysregulated, doesn't matter, but their ability to recognize that state, the awareness of that state, allows then for the cognitive intervention of making a choice to do something differently. And if we've pre-installed some of your skill sets, then those choices become easier. I have a template to work from. And that's what you've done to a large degree in your book is you've given those skill sets for the interventions, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I always say that the more parents can practice the skills that I have in my book for regulating or tolerating emotions or accepting the present moment, the more you can practice those, even at moments where you aren't dysregulated, where things are easy breezy, the more likely it is that in those tough, difficult moments, you're going to be able, like you're saying, to fall back on this template. You're going to be able to use these skills. It's kind of like, if you're learning to ride a bike and the first time you try to get on a bike, you go down a really steep hill. That's the very first time you get to pedal, you're going to crash, right? It's going to not be great. But if instead you practice first on, a flat, even surface, it's going to make it a whole lot easier to eventually transition to going on those steep downhills.
And the practice piece, I think when I first started practicing this stuff years ago, to me, it felt affected to me. It didn't feel genuine to me. It felt like it was something that I was putting on. And I know that a lot of parents feel this. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel integrated. And it's not going to, but by doing it, by the repetition, there's something that shifts, that it becomes a part of the internal architecture. It becomes a part of how you do things in general in terms of engagement.
You're rewiring your brain to respond in a different way in all contexts, ideally, down the road.
Yeah, you use ACT. I use the notions of awareness, acceptance, and approval, and they really kind of track the same pieces because that tolerance is just an approval of what's here, and I'm going to just sit in whatever is there and not have judgment on it as a natural state. And it's a game changer.
And like you said, at first it can feel really unnatural because our emotions are there for a reason. They serve an adaptive evolutionary purpose. We feel an emotion because it motivates us to take action to bring about whatever change it is that would be beneficial for us in theory. So if I feel anger, I want to then go out and yell. I want to fight. I want to defend whatever it is I'm upset about. And that can serve me well, right? And so when we're kind of not giving into those urges to lash out in a moment of anger or frustration, we're not giving into those like adaptive urges that we actually do have. And I would argue that they are adaptive in many cases. It's going to feel really unnatural, right? Under the tolerate skills, for instance, one of the skills I have, it's one of my favorite skills of all time, and it's to act opposite, entirely opposite to the emotion that you're feeling. So think about how unnatural that is. I treat a lot of anxiety, and the treatment for that is what we call exposure therapy, which is doing the exact opposite of what your anxiety pulls for. So if I'm feeling really anxious, whatever it may be, to touch something, to go somewhere, to give a talk or whatever, I'm going to do the opposite of avoid. I'm going to approach that all the way while accepting that, my feared outcomes might happen. And same thing when we're feeling any other emotion, right? We can do the exact opposite to help us better tolerate that emotion and make sure that that emotion doesn't call the shots. But it's not going to feel natural in any way, shape, or form.
This is how we train horses.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Well, if you've got an animal that is a flight animal, we're talking about safety, right? They're a herd animal. And there's something out there that makes them anxious. You approach it.
Yeah.
You give it distance. You let them orient to it and see that it's not a danger. You don't put their face in it, but you let them see it. And then you back off and you do it again and you do it again. And it's the same wiring system. I love I work with horses. I do have a practice where I do equine coaching, and the notion is, what is here in this engagement with this 1,200-pound animal? What comes up for you in it, and orienting to, is this dangerous or not? Is this something that is opening, or is it that? And to be able to hang with that awareness of what's here and install something different. So one of the things, and I'm interested to your approach because you've got the clinical basis with the CBT and the DBT and whatnot. I'm curious in this parenting notion of so many of us run on unconscious behavior, day-to-day routine, and self-awareness is kind of at arm's length out there. Sometimes for a reason. Sometimes that self-awareness is just super uncomfortable and we haven't, navigated the demons that are behind it and all of that. But awareness of a situation, awareness of a state, a personal state, awareness of others' personal states seems to be the primary ingredient here. And that's the piece that you've put in your art in terms of awareness, developing that mindfulness. These are all words that people hear every single day when they've opened a book or they read this, but the development of that skill set, how do we portray that to somebody to get them to question what's going on for that child that they're acting that way?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's going on for that partner that's acting in that direction? What's going on for that employee or that associate that's causing that behavior, rather than the reactive piece of, that pisses me off, I'm activated by it.
Yeah. How do we help somebody get to that place of curiosity and non-judgmentalness and just more mindfulness of what is, as opposed to saying this shouldn't be happening?
And I'm going to add on top of that question, because I think ultimately what we're trying to do as a parent in that process is install that hardware in the child as well.
Yeah. What I will say is it's, again, that's like a thing that's easier said than done for us and for helping our kids get to that point too, right? That we are, as humans, like we are quick to judge. We're quick to make those judgments and to have those strong reactions. Again, those emotions are there for a reason. So we're designed to have them and the urges that come with those emotions. And the more that we can practice using mindfulness as a skill, right? Again, mindfulness is, just to be clear, because I think mindfulness is a bit of a buzzword these days. It's out there all the time, but I don't think many people actually really understand what it is. When I'm talking about mindfulness, I'm talking about dropping into the present moment and accepting the present moment exactly as it is, without judgment, as experienced through any one of the five senses, right? So it could be what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you touch, what you taste. And the feel, that could also be in your body too. It doesn't just have to be outside of you, but it's really taking a moment to drop into that, to notice what is exactly as it is without jumping to assumptions about what it means, without having any judgments about it. And the more that we can practice that, even in bite-sized moments, even for 30 seconds here, for a minute here, The more we do that, each time we do that, we strengthen the muscle for being able to tune into the present, to be more aware of what's actually happening. Because if you think about it, we can't really change anything, as far as I'm concerned, unless we actually first understand it, right? If we go about trying to bring about change without understanding what's actually happening,
Yes.
we're
Yeah.
probably going to miss the mark. We're not going to get at like the kid's underlying need that they're trying to meet when they're doing that behavior that's really pissing you off, right? Like we're just going to miss that. And so we first have to increase that awareness, that understanding, and we can do that through mindfulness. And you can practice mindfulness. What's neat about it is it's not something that you have to do. Like you don't have to go to a secluded room for 30 minutes a day with your eyes closed to practice, right? We can practice it anywhere on the fly, no matter what we're doing. So even if your kids are screaming at the top of your lungs, you can take 5 seconds to practice mindfulness. You can do it while you're doing the dishes or going for a walk. Right? There's so many opportunities to practice, and each time we practice, that practice does accumulate. It makes it more likely that in those heated moments with our kids, with a partner, with a colleague, a sister, or whatever, whoever it may be, that we're going to be able to take a more mindful approach. That's going to be much more likely to be productive and effective.
So I'm stuck, and I'm stuck in my own paradigm, and I want to expand this a little bit
Okay.
because we're talking about something that I think is essential in any relationship, but especially in a parenting relationship. And that is I look at it from a couple of different sides. So we've got the cognitive component, and I work with a lot of people that are stuck in their heads. And we look at it from a somatic component, where there's just something going on physiological, and something has triggered that internal mechanism for the response, for the physiological response that's gotten there. From my standpoint, my orientation is one leads the other. And I may not cognitively know what's happening in a moment, but I am very aware that something's going on in my system. And I've always proposed through my own process that the mindfulness starts there, because if I can be in that, okay, something's going on here, I don't know what it is, that opens the door to the cognitive exploration. And then the cognitive exploration in that leads back to the regulation of the nervous system. So the orientation component.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that in a different sequence? And if you do, can you explain that? Because what I want for myself, but also for our listeners, is to have a basic blueprint of how do I step into this mindfulness, this being in the moment with this activation, with this child that's acting out, with this partner that's acting out, and come back to a notion again that this isn't about me, that this is just a situation that's here. How do I navigate?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first, I think it's important to note that, like I said, you don't want to try any of these skills for the first time in the heat of the moment. So trying to bring
Right.
mindfulness to like a meltdown is probably not going to be so easy if it's the first time you've ever practiced it. Right. So again, we're building those muscles up over time, ideally. But in terms of to your question about like, it's almost like you're asking like which comes first. Do we notice the thoughts? Do we notice the physical sensations? And then where do we intervene? I think what I'll go back to is again those primary and secondary ingredients. So we talked about the primary ingredients. I do think that even though sometimes those thoughts that we have completely fly under the radar, we don't realize we're having those thoughts. Right. First, we notice the physical symptoms of
Mhm.
the emotion. I do think that those thoughts are always there. Again, sometimes we just don't recognize them,
Right.
and they're
No,
often what's driving what's going on.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, but then we do. You're right. So in terms of the secondary ingredients, there are a number. So there are those physiological, biological changes that happen in our bodies that we don't even realize that are happening, right? Neurochemical changes are happening. We're feeling those physical sensations in our bodies. So for instance, if I'm angry, my heart's racing, my muscles are tense. Maybe I get hot and sweaty, right? I'm feeling kind of like just amped up and activated. Then we have action urges that come. And those could be urges, again, to fight, to yell, to withdraw. can also be urges to shift how I'm communicating, right? So both like my body language, my tone of voice, the words I choose to use, those are going to shift as well. And so that's another component of an emotion. From there, we've got what often eventually happens is at some point in that process, right, where all these things are kind of going off, all these components are present, we start to become aware, right? Like something's going on. I may not even be able to name the emotion that I'm angry, but I know there's some emotion on board. And maybe it's because I'm feeling such intense physical symptoms that I recognize something's happening. So we have this emotional awareness. And then we've got after effects of the emotion, right? So even like once the emotion has begun to dissipate a little bit, if I was just angry moments ago, I am much more likely to view what happens over the next few minutes or hours in a way that might kick off anger again or some other painful unwanted emotion. Essentially, like that emotion of anger or whatever that emotion was that I was feeling before so intensely is now a vulnerability factor for making it more likely that a new emotion is going to fire, that's going to be painful and hard for me to navigate. So to your point about, right, like where do we need to go first? You were saying you think we might need to kind of go after the thoughts first? No, you said the
No,
physical symptoms first.
where I was at with that, Alyssa, is coming into where does the awareness awaken? Because awareness is the first piece in all of this. So, am I aware of this, and is this the portal, or am I aware of this, and this is the portal? Because
Yeah,
different people have different approaches.
totally. And I think it could also be, for it may be neither of those. It may be there's again, a prompting event that's happening. And I know there's a good chance in seconds I'm going to start to feel something really intense given what's going on right here. Right. So that might be my awareness. So I think it's the awareness, I'd say, comes from knowing the complexity of our emotions. And at different times, there may be a day where it's the intense physical symptoms, another day where it's the thought that you're having about your kid that cues you into the presence of a strong unwanted emotion, or just recognizing, oh, you know what, like, yeah, I didn't sleep well last night. There's a good chance in a minute I might start to feel really angry given what's transpiring here. So I think awareness can come in many forms. And again, coming back to I think what you were alluding to is that maybe we need to have some sort of like an awareness that might then help calm the physical symptoms, that then we can shift the thoughts or vice versa. And what I would say is, I don't know that I think that awareness, once we have that awareness that something's going on, we're having this intense response, we can intervene at any one of those points. We can go after the primary ingredients or the secondary ingredients, and then we can go after another ingredient. So maybe I go after the physical symptoms, right? I'm getting hijacked and like all I can, I just feel that intense arousal. And so I do something to lower that. That can then enable my prefrontal cortex to come back online, help me kind of get my brain back so that I might be able to use a more effortful skill. Maybe I can reframe my thoughts, or I can think about how I might change that prompting event or go after a vulnerability factor, that sort of thing. Or I can use the skill of opposite action in that moment because I'm no longer so flooded that it feels impossible to do anything other than yell.
So, what just occurred to me in that awareness piece, in this mindfulness conversation that we just had or are having, is this notion of orientation, present moment orientation, the acceptance of what's here, but also the awareness that this is here. Because that orientation, I think in these high emotional moments, what we're trying to do is control a situation for safety reasons, either real or perceived, right? So we're trying to come out of that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. So that orientation, that mindful orientation, if you will, sets the stage of there's something here that doesn't need my attention, or there's something here that needs my attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I'm not hijacked. I'm back into that cognitive process. What is the path? What are the components? What are the skill sets to engage here?
Yep. Yeah, and I'd argue too, to your point, I think sometimes one thing that can lead us astray as parents is we oftentimes we're not just worried about like some possible danger in a given moment, but we're also thinking about like all the things that might transpire down the road, right? Like if my kid is yelling now, is he then going to go off and start yelling at all of his teachers? And is he going to yell at his romantic partner one day and at his kids one day, right? I like project to the future all these horrible things that might happen, which makes it really hard to respond to my kid right here, right now,
Nothing
in an
like a
effective
little,
way.
nothing like a little catastrophic thinking.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. So, what what are the pieces here today that you would like to convey to our listeners that are primary for you and for them to be able to engage in a different way of being? Because, frankly, Alyssa, we're very much on the same page. The notion of how to approach and to be present and attuned is the answer to everything societally, within the family, within relationship. These are the components as parents that are going to change generational. But for our audience here today, most of us don't come from that. We come from the opposite of that. So finding that notion of being vulnerable, of being safe, of being oriented, being present, and not reactive to the massive stimulation that's out there in a high conflict custody situation is the opposite of what their experience is. So, what are the pieces that you would suggest to be the primary portal for people to start to walk through to begin to work differently in this?
Yeah. Well, I will say in a high conflict, custody situation, oh my gosh, emotions are going to be really intense. Like, yes, you can use, I please use the acceptance skills, use the regulate skills, but know that there are going to be those moments where there's nothing you can do. Like an emotion is going to be there and it's going to be really hard to sit with. And know that that's where the tolerate skills come in. Knowing that I think for me, I remember growing up, I had this belief that, like, if I felt an emotion, right, like you kind of act on it. Like that emotion, something happens, I feel it, and boom, that's what I'm going to do then, because what else are you going to do with that emotion? I think just recognizing that you don't have to follow the urges that come, right? You can still allow intense emotions to be there. And when I talk about emotion savvy, I don't being emotionally savvy to me doesn't mean suppressing or avoiding, ignoring unwanted emotions. I'd say that's like the opposite of being emotionally savvy. It's instead about being able to feel them in full without letting them govern our behaviors. So can I let those emotions in? Let them be there and then use skills to help me be as skillful as possible. So I think just knowing that's like on the table. That's an option, a path you can go down. For many listeners, like that might actually be something novel, something new that, maybe wasn't modeled for us, that we haven't, they haven't yet encountered, they haven't discovered. At the same time, I would say, know that there's also a really sizable gap often between knowing and doing. So you can know there's this kind of higher ideal path. That doesn't mean you're going to follow it every time or really any time for a while. You might continue to go down the highly reactive path. And that's not a bad thing, right? We're all doing the best we can with the tools that we currently have. And if that's happening, it's not feeling good for you. It's not feeling good for the co-parent you're interacting with. It's not feeling good for your kid. Know that there is another path and you can learn skills to help you begin to shift, to be more skillful in those tough moments. And you're human. No matter how much you practice, there will be times where you aren't going to be as effective, as skillful as you'd like to be. And that's okay, right? We can then just go back to trying to do better down the road.
That's a big piece. And when I think of tolerating, when I talk to my clients about and my parents about tolerating, I come back to this notion of It's only sensation, and it doesn't have meaning unless you put meaning to it, and it's transient if you don't grab a hold of it. That's a lot easier said than done.
Indeed, indeed.
But the intensity that, you learn to navigate in this, if you learn how to navigate that intensity, changes the trajectory for the success and the resiliency of your child.
Yeah. And I'll jump in if it's okay, because there's one skill that I think could be especially helpful for the people who are listening now. And that is a skill for exactly what you're talking about, for like when it's so intense and there is that physiological arousal there. It's a set of skills, actually. It's an acronym I call them the CARE skills. And they're really designed to rapidly reduce that physiological arousal so that you don't feel like you're about to burst, right? So that you can then get your brain back a little bit more, so that you can be a little more thoughtful, a little less reactive in the moment. So if it would be helpful, I'd be happy to walk you
Please
through
do.
those
Please
skills.
do.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
all ears here.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So, for those who know dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, these are actually the tip skills from DBT that I transformed, and I call them the CARE skills. And I call them that just because I find that acronym to be easier to remember. To me, the tip acronym was always a little clunky and hard to remember. And I think it's kind of catchy because when we're feeling strong emotions, we do need to take care, right, in order to make sure that those emotions don't hijack us. So I will say that, especially for the first skill, but also a couple of these that I'm going to note, they are ones that can so rapidly reduce arousal that they can actually bring down the heart rate pretty quickly. And so for any listeners who have some sort of a heart condition, or maybe they're taking a medication that affects their heart, it's important to talk with your doctor first before using these skills, because it may not be safe to use them. But if you think about it, when we're really heated in a moment with our kid or with our co-parent, and we're activated, we're feeling a strong unwanted emotion, oftentimes what's happening is, our hearts are racing. And again, we feel hot, we feel sweaty, we feel all those things. And one thing we can do, we can bring in these CARE skills. So they stand for cool with ice, activate your body, relax your muscles, and exhale slowly. And that first of them, the cool with ice one, might sound kind of like, how is ice going to help me? But there's actually like this really powerful skill that we can bring in to elicit what's called the dive reflex. So the dive reflex is what we are evolutionarily programmed to experience when we're submerged in really cold water. You're nodding your head, you know this.
It puts the polyvagal system on its ear.
Yeah, yeah. And what happens is, when we're in cold water, our hearts slow down and stop pumping blood to our extremities in order to heat our core and conserve energy. That's pretty vital when we're in cold water. And we can actually elicit this dive reflex, like mimic it, by either dunking our head into a very large bowl of cold water, like very cold water. You could even add a few ice cubes to that, which can get kind of messy, putting your head in water. You could also, if you want though, take a bowl, or not a bowl, a flexible gel ice pack. And you can put it on your cheekbones and like over your temples, just leave it here for about 30 seconds. And you can, probably with that gel ice pack, you don't want to put it directly on your face. So you can just put like a cold, wet towel around it, or paper towel around it, and then put it on your face. Leave it there for 30 seconds. And I have seen heart rates plummet by 50% or more in just those 30 seconds. And so that is a way. And I had a mom recently tell me, who had come to a talk that I gave, and she said, I was about to lose it with my kids the other day. And I thought about you. I remembered the ice skill, and I went to my freezer. Actually, she didn't go to her freezer. She got a bowl of water. And she dunked her head, and she was like, it was a miracle, right? Like, she didn't explode at her kids in that moment when she was feeling so pulled to do so. So that's cool with ice. Activate your body is about doing intense aerobic exercise for about 20 minutes or more. But you can also do it in, even if you don't have that, you could blast some music quickly and do a little dance party in your living room, or you could get outside or even just in your, do jumping jacks in your kitchen. Do something to get your heart rate up. And what the reason that can be so helpful is because when our heart rates go up, there's this, from exercise, there's this natural heart rate recovery period that occurs, right? It's like our heart rates go up and then they naturally come down. And so we can notice that shift, and that can actually help to, help us feel a little calmer. The exercise also allows us to discharge some of that pent up energy. And exercise can release those feel good chemicals, those endorphins that can help us in the moment. So that's activate your body. Relax your muscles is really about, activated, we're upset, we tend to tense up, clench our muscles, and that actually just kind of fuels the emotion even more. And so, one way that we can kind of reverse that process, bring about a sense of relaxation, is to actually, ironically, first tense those muscles even more intentionally, and then release them. It's kind of like what happens if you have a pendulum that's at rest and you just try to knock it. It's not going to go all that far. But if you first pull that pendulum back and then you release it, it's going to go a whole lot farther. So if we can first tense our muscles and then release them, we're going to feel a greater sense of relaxation.
Nice.
So you can tense for 3 or 4 seconds and then release and just notice it for a few seconds. And you can do that in individual muscle groups one at a time, or you can do that all throughout your body, depending on how much time you have. You just all at once tense every muscle and then release. And then exhale slowly. We probably all, as parents at some point or another told our kids to take a deep breath in a moment when they're upset, right? You actually did what I love, which is to take that like slow breath out. But usually when I say take a deep breath to someone, they'll go, right? That big inhalation. And what it turns out that our heart rates speed up when we breathe in, and they slow down when we breathe out. And so one way in a moment where we're feeling activated that we can actually calm ourselves down a little bit, decrease that heart rate, reduce physiological arousal, is to take just a normal breath in for say 3 or 4 seconds, and then a really slow breath out for 7 to 8 seconds. We can even kind of like slow down that process even further, help to slow down our heart even more by holding our breath for another 3 or 4 seconds before taking that next inhalation. And so these are skills or ones that you can use pretty much anywhere, anytime, right? If you're in the middle of a work meeting, maybe you can't get up and do jumping jacks or run around the room. But if you have even a glass of water right there, you can kind of put it on your head for a few seconds. It may not fully bring on the dive reflex, but it can still be really helpful.
Hacking the physiology and learning those skill sets could just save so much anxiety down the road. So thank you for coming in here. This has been a really good conversation. I hope we can do it again.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to open this if you're willing to questions. I think we've got some people that are listening in here. And Masi, if you would be willing to help us navigate that piece. So bring in any questions that anybody might have so we can answer them. And I'm getting a handle on this somewhere, maybe. Okay, I've just got the 3 of us here. Masi, do we have anybody else in? Can you send me a quick chat? Nope. Okay, nobody came in to join us today. Thank you again. So, Alissa, would you let our listeners know how they can reach out to you and if they want to work with you, where they can find your book and any other resources that you might have?
Certainly, yeah. So you can find me on my website, AlissaJerud.com. And so it's ALISSAJERUD.com. So I'm there. And then my book, there are links to buy my book from my website. You can also go on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's in some small bookstores, but not a ton. So it may be easier to find it on those bigger sites. Walmart is another one. And it actually will be coming out, the audiobook will be coming out on November 18th. So that'll also be something you can get wherever you get your audiobooks as well.
And you've supplied us with those links, so those links will be in the show notes when we do the release of this.
Yeah, great.
Again, thank you for joining us, and everybody out there, be well. Take care.
Thank you so much.